Praise God. It's good to praise Him, to come into His presence, to shake the dust of the week off, to be in the presence of the living God. For what does it say? That in His presence is what? The fullness of joy. It isn't just a little bit. It's the presence, His being close to God. It's what our hearts and our souls crave. That cannot be filled by any other thing. Well, we see that in ancient times, well, I guess we could say that it began in ancient times, there was this idea of a covenant meal. Can you think of the earliest description of this offering that was made? Okay, so turn over to Genesis chapter 14. Of course, it was Abraham, our forefather, the one who has began the covenant with God. He was found to be faithful. What does faithful mean? What are some definitions of that?
Devoted.
Okay, devoted, yeah. What else?
Righteous.
Okay, yes, righteous. Obedient, yeah. Faithful. If you're faithful to something or somebody, you could say that you're what? Committed. Yeah. And so Abraham, who believed in a God he never saw, but he heard God. And he went, and his faith was exercised by going forth, well, I guess you could say in many things, but he left the comfort of his homeland, and he left to follow the voice of God. And he was rewarded for each step along the way that he fulfilled the will of God. And of course, we know that he was faithful even to sacrifice his own son, had God willed it. But God merely wanted to demonstrate his faithfulness, and then for God to show his own faithfulness to Abraham, and not just to him, but to us today, all the way down. So in Genesis chapter 14, and of course, there was a war, bless you, that Abraham participated in. Abraham, again, was not just a wandering sheep herder. He was a king. In those days, and even still today, kings, he was a mobile king, if you could think of it like that. He had wealth, he had status, he had an army, and he was a king. And so he joined in with the other kings, and they went to war, of course, which Sodom, the king of Sodom, was a part of that war alongside of him. In verse 17 of Genesis chapter 14, it says, "And the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shiva," that is the king's valley, "and after his return from the defeat of, Hedolamer and the kings who were with him. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, for he was priest of God Most High." Melchizedek. What does Melchizedek mean?
King of righteousness.
That's right. So Melech Zadik, king of righteousness. The very first time that this particular combination of things is mentioned, bread and wine. And it said that he wasn't just this guy, he wasn't just a king. He was a king, king of Salem. Now, what does Salem mean? Okay. Our tradition teaches us that place was perhaps the place where the future Jerusalem, don't know for sure, 100%, but he was king of a place called peace. And he was, by his title, Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. And he brings out, what? Bread and wine. And he brings it out to these kings. And it says that, and continuing, that he blessed him, and this is Melchizedek, again speaking over Abraham, "Blessed be Abram, or Avram, of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And he, this is Abraham, gave him a tithe of all. Now the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me of the persons, and you take the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to the Lord Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, and I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you might say, I have made Abram rich." So our father recognized that he didn't want it to be said that this man, who he knew was unrighteous, could be said to have made him rich because he trusted in God. And God is the one who enriches. So we see that this is the very first time in which bread and wine is mentioned. So our people were in the desert. And what happened? How did God feed them in the desert? What's that?
Manna.
Okay, manna, which was called what?
Bread of heaven.
The bread of heaven. Because it literally came from heaven and descended, was gathered and prepared and consumed. Manna was called the bread of angels. And so, because it had a divine quality, because it appeared by the will of God. So that's interesting. So the manna. Later, God would institute the sacrificial system through Moses. What were the sacrifices for? Okay, atonement. Yeah. What else?
Thanks.
Okay, there was a thanks. You made a sacrifice to say thank you to God. It wasn't always necessarily about sin, per se, although that's the primary reason for the sacrifices. So we could think about the sacrifices as gifts given to God. And when they gave these things to God, what was the acknowledgement? That they did it themselves? Or how did our people, and how should we see what we have?
They were only giving back to God what God had given to them.
Okay? I mean, we sing it in one of our songs. Even the breath that we have is only God's. And when we praise him with our mouths, we're not really giving him anything that he doesn't already possess, except our will is seeking him when we praise him with our hearts. And so a sacrifice is a gift given to God. And so what's the whole purpose of giving gifts to God? Make him happy? Buy him off? What? Why would we give a gift to God? What's that?
To show our gratitude.
Okay, show our gratitude. Amen. What else? Why would we give gifts to God? When your child gives you a drawing, and by Picasso standards, it's actually probably better than Picasso. If it was Rembrandt, by Rembrandt's standards, it isn't so much. But when you look at your child's drawing, and you see that the figures are a little bit, perhaps, not as realistic as they could be. When you see the letters that are just not perfect like maybe they could be, do you sit there and critique it going, yeah, better luck next time? Or do you see that drawing and your heart wells up because that child did it just for you?
The gift we give is out of love. It's a part of us. We're giving what we're creating, or what was created and given to us. We're giving back as an act of, we just love it.
Yep.
It's not a catch.
So our people have a tradition of the dedication of the firstborn to God. And it's an offering up of the firstborn. And that's a beautiful tradition. I mean, all of our children are God's. But he asks us to show a sign of love for him. So the sacrifices had particular purposes, and each of them had something to be directed. A sacrifice, in the biblical and the Levitical sacrifices, I'd say almost all of them, something was done to those sacrifices. And what was that? There was the drink offering, which was, of course, poured out before God. But most of the other sacrifices were what? Burned. They were burned. They were brought to God, and then it was burned or cooked. And what could we say that heat and fire do to meat? It consumes some of it, yeah. Yeah, there's smoke, yeah, that comes from that. All right, bring it a little closer to home. You're at the grill.
Gives off an aroma.
Okay, there's an aroma.
Yeah.
That is now, what happens to that meat that is put upon the grill? Does it?
It gets cooked.
It gets cooked. And we could say that cooking, heating, is what?
Purification.
a purification or a transformation. It went from one state to a different state. And so the beautiful thing is that whenever, and someone just mentioned that the sacrifice was, there was smoke that happened. And what did God say that the smoke was to him? A sweet aroma. It was something beautiful to God. Why? Because God likes to smell burning meat? No. It was out of obedience and love to him that our people have done this. And it was that. When you and I sacrifice today, we don't burn animals. We don't light things on fire and consume things that burn and go up there. Our life becomes a sacrifice. And there is fire in these times. And our humility before God, our prayers before God and prayers of our brothers and sisters all over this world, it says that those sacrifices are beautiful to God. And that the prayers, our suffering, arises to God and it is pleasing to him. Why? Because we're suffering? No, because we're sacrificing. And we're saying, not my will, God, but your will be done. And those things are beautiful to God. Sacrifice involves transformation. It's not the same as it was from before. So the Mishkan, which of course was established in the desert, the Mishkan and then later the temple, they all had one thing in common of which they were called. And many of you have referred to this, and others refer to a place where they go to worship as something. And we say that this is the what?
House of God.
House, that's right. House of God. Everything that God does is about being a family. From the very beginning, the first family, all the way up today to where we each of us have our families in our homes. And so when we come together as a family, do you have a particular place in your house? Maybe you have a couple of different places that you gather and do what? Talk, but you gather for a meal. When you gather as a family to have a meal, there's something that's taking place there. There's a sign of community in your family. It was called the Bet HaMikdash, was a name for the temple, was a house of God. And when we come to the table of God, we come to his house, and we receive from him something very special, something very beautiful. When the Levites went and they did the sacrifices, did they just go, I think I'm going to do it this way today? I think I'm going to maybe do this, maybe I'll do that. Or did they follow something else? What was that? Okay. Yeah, they followed his instructions, the scriptures. The Levites had to do things very, very particularly. If they walked up to the altar of incense and they went out into the desert and they grabbed some bush that smelled pretty good, and they grabbed this piece of resin that, it smells pretty good, and they gathered together and they threw it on to the altar of incense. Was that doing what God asked? No. In fact, you could say bad things might happen. Because the altar of incense was, of course, representative of the prayers, and the way that God desired to be was very specific. Did they say, today, I think when I go to the Mishkan, I'm going to, look, there's a herd of swine. Hey, can I buy this for you? I want to go offer it to God. I mean, it's right there, right? What would happen if they would have brought that to the tabernacle? Yeah, they wouldn't have gotten very far because somebody would have gone, I don't know if you remember, but God doesn't want that. What was Cain's really first sin, you could say? Jealousy. Yeah, he was jealous. When he approached God, what did he do wrong?
Brought the wrong offering.
Okay, he brought an offering, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that he came there and said, here I am. He brought an offering with him. But what? It wasn't what God desired. You see, it doesn't say it explicitly, although it says it, sort of by virtue of the text. If he had said, I'm sorry, God, I didn't know. And God said, if you offer what I asked of you, then you would be accepted, right? Had Cain humbled himself and said, I'm sorry, God, I didn't know, but I know now. Thank you for teaching me. And the next time he came in and offered a sacrifice to God with the blood of a goat or a sheep, God would have been pleased, right? What was Cain's biggest sin? Pride, because he didn't listen to God and what God desired from him. So these sacrifices that our people brought, something happened to part of the sacrifice. What was that? When they brought, say, a sheep, and the sheep was prepared according to what God asked, and that was put upon the altar of offering. You can see that it's a beautiful thing to see a representation of it that we have, courtesy of Grace Life over there. When they brought that sacrifice and it was laid on the altar, did they go, okay, I want it back? What did they do? They left it there. And then what happened to that offering? What occurred? Okay, some of it was burned up completely, but a majority of the sacrifices, what happened to it? Okay, so that sacrifice was divided, and some of it was left there to be consumed, and the rest of it was given to the priest to take to the family. And many of the sacrifices, you took home a portion of what you brought with you. You brought a live animal, and you went home with barbecue. And when you sat down to eat that meal that had been offered up there, it was holy. And it was special because it had been offered to God, and God had, and by virtue of obedience, this had been transformed into something different, altered into something that was, now listen, if there's a sheep standing here, alive, and you walk up to that sheep and you bite that sheep, sheep's going to get angry.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd get angry if somebody came up and bit you. You can't eat a live sheep. It has to be transformed into what you can consume. And so the sacrifices were there for a particular purpose, but they had to be done the way that God asked, and then they had to be consumed. So every sacrifice that was offered was a blood sacrifice. And why was blood so special? Okay, so you've read ahead, that's good. There's life in the blood. When God brought the Gentiles into the covenant, into the new covenant, he gave them a commandment, or one of the commandments. He didn't give them a whole lot. He didn't give us, as a community, a whole lot per se. But there was one thing in there that he said, don't do. What was that?
Eat the blood. Don't eat the blood.
Yeah, don't eat the blood. Yep. Because blood is sacred by virtue of what it is. Blood is life. If your blood doesn't work right, you're going to suffer. Blood is that which carries nutrients. It carries all of the good things throughout the body. And so blood was very special to God. And so this was, of course, done and prepared. And if you were to go to a kosher butcher and you were to purchase kosher meat, that meat would have been prepared in a very special way that there would be no blood left in it. And so by virtue of how it had been prepared and, of course, then the cooking, so there was something that was offered. Turn over to Matthew chapter 26. You see, everything builds upon everything else in God's ways and in his scriptures. Did Abraham practice the faith of Noah? Yes and no, because God showed more things. Did David practice the same things that Moses did? No. Yes and no. He did, but things transformed So when Moses built the Mishkan and traveled throughout, were there the divisions of the priests that were appropriate or were called? If there was, it wasn't explicitly laid out in the text. It was David's seeing that what was happening in heaven is what God wanted upon this earth. So it built upon the foundation of what had come from before it. So we know that in Matthew 26, of course, this is the time in which Messiah is celebrating Passover. What was Passover, or is Passover, a celebration of? We could say in just a broad sense.
Freedom from slavery.
Okay, freedom from slavery. What else?
Bread.
Okay, there's certainly bread.
Oh, Allah.
Is any Passover meal complete without the vino, the wine? Could you have a Passover meal without without the fruit of the vine, we could say? No, you couldn't, because it's a part of what God has established. If we said to God, I don't really want wine this year, I think I want some whiskey. I don't think you'd make it past maybe 1 cup. It wasn't what God asked. Don't change the thing that God wanted because he wanted it in this particular way. What if you say, I don't really want to have bread this year at Passover. I want to have unleavened cake, chocolate. Sounds good. I don't know how the rabbis would work around that one. I don't know. But he said unleavened bread. And so we have unleavened bread. We don't decide, I really like brioche bread. So we should have that. Is there bread out there today? No. All right. We won't use any illustrations there then. But God had a very particular way that he wanted things done. And so we come to the Passover. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 20. It says that when evening had come, he sat down with the 12, and as they were eating, he said, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were increasingly sorrowful, and saying, one of you will betray me, and they're increasingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to the other, "Lord, is it I?" And he said, "It is he who dipped his hand with me into the dish who will betray me. For the Son of Man indeed goes just as is written of him, but woe is the man by which the Son of Man is betrayed, for it had been good for him not that he had not been born." Then Judas, who was betraying him, said, "Rabbi, is it I?" And he said, "You have said it." And as they were eating, Yeshua took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take and eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now until the day in which I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." And so we see that he, in the midst of the Passover meal, which our people have been celebrating for thousands of years and continue to celebrate today, this two things which are key to the Passover. You could have nothing else, but if you had the bread and the wine, you could celebrate Passover. Trust me, all the other yummy stuff is very much encouraged. But to celebrate Passover, that's all you needed, was the bread and the wine. Why do you think that Messiah said about the bread, "This is my body"? Why didn't he say about the lamb, which when done right is extremely yummy? Why do you think he identified himself with this bread? Okay, so he identifies himself with the manna that what? Okay, that God sent down from heaven, that was to be gathered and consumed. He didn't identify himself with a radish or anything else. He identified himself with something that was a great part of what God had given to our people.
Plus, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And he is the word of God.
Yes. Yeah. Messiah, he began to, as those that had been appointed to, he began to transform even still what our people had known into something special. Does God have the authority to do that? Is Yeshua God? Absolutely. That's the foundation of our faith, is that he is God, that he is truly the Lord. And so, as our people began to gather after that time, they began to celebrate this. Over to Mark chapter 14. In verse 22, each of the gospel writers, they give us, as the light of the Spirit shines through them, we turn this facet a little bit here and we see the light in just a little bit difference, because the apostle here says another phrase that is not mentioned in the one that we just read. It says, and as they were eating, Yeshua took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them, saying, take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks to them, they all drank from it. And he said, this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. He says, this is the blood of the new covenant. And he makes something very specific about this cup. So, as our people gathered after this time, when did they begin to celebrate this? Did they celebrate it simply just on Passover? When did they begin to celebrate this?
When they gather.
Okay, and they begin to celebrate it every single week. As they gathered in those places, they would go to synagogue. They would go to temple if they were in Jerusalem, and they would continue in the early ways, the many things that they continued. But when they gathered together as the community, as the Yachad, when did they gather? On the first day of the week to celebrate. And so they gathered on the first day, and they gathered, where would they gather? Could they go to the synagogue and celebrate this particular revelation from God? They had to meet in the homes. Again, we come back to the home as a central place of what God and how God does things. And why do you think they would gather in their homes? I can think of a couple reasons, but what are some that you can think of? Okay. Yep. And why else?
The home is a place of family.
Yep. When you gather in a place and you sit down to eat with somebody, you're showing a level of acceptance and a community. In the East, in the Eastern traditions, if you exclude somebody from your table, it's a sign of disgrace. And so, but there was something that had to happen, and would begin a little bit rocky at first, but then would sort of even out as a couple of years went by. When they gathered in their homes, was it just Jews gathering now? Or were in many places, in many cities, would there not be those that had formerly been Gentiles who are now a part of the community of Israel? Why did they gather in their homes? Well, because our Jewish people would have said, no, they're unclean, and we can't eat with them. But in the context of believers' homes, they would gather with those that had formerly been unclean, but had now been a part of and brought into the covenant, the new covenant of Messiah.
Which is one of the reasons they couldn't gather in the temple. The Gentiles would not have been allowed in.
Yeah. So there was something that was taking place. Every time I read a passage in the scriptures, and I speak that passage, it breaks my heart. When the woman came to Yeshua and said, Lord, heal my daughter. And he said to her, it's not good to give the children's bread and feed it to the dogs. But she was not offended because she had something in mind she desired, and it's the healing of her daughter. She said, even the dogs grab the scraps that fall from the master's table. And what did he say of her? Wow, great is your faith. And she became one of the most ardent followers of Messiah. And she wasn't Jewish. But by her faith, she appropriated something that most Jews will never grab hold of. And she was welcomed into the community because she had faith that wasn't dependent upon her bloodline. But there was something that happened in that time. And so we see that as things began to develop, they would gather on the first day of the week towards the evening. And towards the evening, what do you generally do? I know I do it every day without fail. Have a meal together. And they would come together and they would celebrate God. And they wouldn't just have a little piece of bread and a little bit of wine. They would have what was called an agape meal together. And they would come together and they would sing songs, hymns. They didn't have a whole lot of instruments happening at the time, so they probably did what? They sang a cappella. They sang, it was all there was. There were very few people that had instruments. So they began to sing many of the hymns that had come from our people. And they began to make new hymns because some people were talented and could sing. Baruch Hashem that we have those people. And they began to create hymns that weren't just from our Jewish people, but they began to create hymns that were about who? Yeshua. And some of those hymns we still have today. They're about him. And so they, like we, would gather together after this service and we would sit down for a meal together. And in the midst of the meal, there would be this blessing by the one who was presiding, the elder who was presiding, and they would say the prayers, and there would be a response to the prayers, and this meal would be celebrated, and there was something very special that was occurring there. And we see that this was, again, not just a meal to get together and eat, there was something special about it. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. First Corinthians chapter 10. In verse 17, this is the apostle writing to the church, the community, the gathering there in Corinth. Now, in giving these instructions, I do not praise you. That never sounds good, right? I'm writing to you, but listen, it's not good. Since you came together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a community, I hear there are divisions among you, and in part, I believe it. For there must be fractions among you, so that those who are approved may be recognized among you. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of the others, and one is in hunger, and the other one is drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in, or do you despise the community of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that on the Messiah Yeshua, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "Take and eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this, and as often as you do drink it, do it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Messiah's death until he comes." So what was he saying here? That as often as you do that, was it just once a year on Passover? Or was it as often as you gathered? He was saying that there was something that was occurring here. When he says that he was not praising them, what was he not praising them about?
Their acts.
Okay. What were the people doing, some of the people in this particular passage? How were they treating this special meal?
As dinner, just,
Okay.
you know.
When you sit down at the Passover meal each year, when I sit there, do we approach that as just another meal that we gather? I mean, it's not fast food. I can guarantee you many hours go into that preparation. When we go there, it's not just a nice meal. It's something that's sacred. Does that look any different than other meals? I guess it depends, on what you eat. But do you see what's in that meal? Do you see everything that went into that meal and the significance of it in a larger context? And so people were gathering, and they were just coming up to the meal, and they were taking a big portion of the food, and it wasn't leaving any for the person that was behind them. And what were others doing with the wine?
Getting drunk, having a little bit extra.
Getting a little schnockered. They weren't treating it with the reverence for which it was there for. So it was something that he wanted to make sure that they understood. And so when we say remember, when Messiah says this is a remembrance, what is it saying?
Refreshing, reminding,
Okay.
rehearsing.
Yep. It was something that I was researching and coming to this message. It was something that I found that was really interesting. It says, most people do not understand memory or memorial as the ancient Hebrews did. For us, memory is something in our heads, merely a mental activity like daydreaming. But in biblical understanding, a memorial is something done so God will remember and take action. Take example for the blowing of the silver trumpets, which Moses commanded to make in Numbers. The Hebrews were there to blow the trumpets over their sacrifices, that you may be remembered before God and be saved. The memorial was an act of blowing the trumpet, and God remembered and took action. It was something, again, it's more than just a looking back and going, oh yeah, I remember that. It was an invocation for God to take action and for something to occur. Interesting. Cornelius, the centurion, in Acts, that the angel told him that his alms would be remembered before God. What were alms, or what are alms? Okay, it was an offering that he gave to God. And it says that God looked upon that, and he was moved by this man's faith. He was somebody who wasn't welcomed into, certainly not one as a Roman and two as a man of the army, but he faithfully sought God. So it was a remembrance. His alms functioned as a memorial, and God remembered and took action. In this case, the action was sending Peter to him with the gospel. And so when Messiah institutes this and he says this is a remembrance, he's saying that something's going to happen. That we, by our faith, come as an offering, and he himself then does something. And so it was, again, a very, very deep thing. It's often called the Lord's table, the Lord's meal, the table of the Lord, communion. What is, in the sense of communion, what is communion in a general sense? Just the word, what does it refer to? If you say that you're in communion with somebody.
Interacting with someone.
Okay.
In relationship.
Okay, and there's the key, relationship, yes? Fellowship, yes. When we say that we're in communion with God, is that a good thing?
Yes.
That's the best thing right there. That's the most important thing. And so to be in communion with God, to come to communion, means that we are in union with him. And the whole purpose of this meal is for what? It's to unify us with God. What do we ultimately need from God? if sin destroys and mars and warps, what do we really need? Healing. It doesn't matter how righteous you are. It doesn't matter how holy you are or how unholy or unrighteous you are. We've all fallen and need healing. All of us. Until our last breath. And so this coming together, if the church is a hospital, if the community is a place of healing, and this is one of the strongest medicines to be able to be healed from that which ails us. And so we could say that this is, again, a beautiful thing when we come together, because we come together and we partake together, which shows that we are in communion with each other. But our whole purpose is to seek this union with God. Amen? It's a very deep topic. It's a very thing that we could spend our entire life and still not grasp every aspect of it. But we're about to celebrate this together as a community. So let us, with wisdom and reason and faith, gather together at his table and partake of his life, together as Mishpacha, his family, the family of God. Amen. Baruch Hashem.